Next up, we have Jeremy Gall. Now, Jeremy is the CEO and founder of Breezeway. Now, Breezeway is a company that I follow personally because I just think that the innovative tech that they use is what the STR industry has needed for such a long time, but it now needs to be globalized and used by everybody. The reason being that is because this is a leading technology that supports STR operators with cleaning schedules, standards, and safety, which basically is what all STR should be about. It's hospitality, it's standards, it's professionalism, cleaning. And cleaning is one of the worst parts of STR because sometimes you can have the most beautiful home in the world, but if it's not cleaned correctly when the guest arrives, then retention is very poor on that property because the guest has had a bad experience. So cleaning is everything. And Jeremy at Breezeway is innovating this. So I'm going to pass you over to Jeremy. He's going to explain exactly what they do and probably how hotels can benefit from this technology, because I really do believe everybody in the hospitality industry of accommodation should be using this type of technology. So I'm going to pass you over to Jeremy now. Jeremy, over to you, my friend.
Thank you so much, Chris. I will, let me share my screen. Pleasure to be here. I'm coming in from California, so I look a little ghostly here on the screen. Bear with me. Thanks so much. I'm Jeremy Gall. I'm the founder and CEO of Breezeway. Chris gave a great intro. Don't need to tell you too much more about that. We help hospitality operators, a little heavier, indexed to short-term rentals than hotels, but in both scenarios, and a lot of alternative and like flex accommodations with their operations and how they take care of the properties and prepare and deliver the guest experience. I want to take one moment. I thought, Federico's presentation was incredible. And just a couple of takeaways there as I'm thinking about it, right? Like from one day to another, the chaos came in. And, in prior presentations, the speedometer over on the side, what we have seen and what we saw in the industry was, in 2020 and even throughout this year, everyone basically went, their business was going well. Short-term rentals and hospitality have been growing for years. And, the chaos came in and the speedometer went to zero. And then depending on what market you were in, it stayed there for a really long time. I think, we may all be having a couple of flashbacks from Federico's presentation about just how challenged, or at least I was, right? It's challenging. We were there, hand in hand with our clients who were struggling from the revenue impacts of COVID and, a raging pandemic that was really, disrupting is too light a word to say what it's done to the hospitality industry over the last 2 years. But then what ended up happening, and I think you can see this, what a story, right? And Federico sort of painted a great picture with some detail there, that in many markets, whether it was short-term rentals first or then it was hotels as well, as we got the pandemic a little under control, people felt safer, markets opened up, there was so much pent-up demand for travel, so much pent-up demand to get out as soon as people felt safe, that the speedometer moved from zero and it just pinned right at the top. And what I mean by that is that, like so many of the changes from the hospitality side, whether it was deeper cleaning protocols, shorter booking windows, being forced or heavily encouraged into more flexible cancellation policies, as Federico said, that are somewhat unsustainable. All of those really just pressed and said, like, okay, business is back. We have travelers, but we have to change everything. We have to adapt, and we've got to do it really quick, because all of a sudden we went from zero occupancy, to full occupancy, and we're not going to get a break. And depending on your market, yes, it's a really good thing, but it's also a super challenging thing. And it was challenging for cleaning and maintenance, which is this little picture up in the corner. And it's challenging because of what we see from a guest expectations perspective. which is why this Amazon van is in the bottom corner, which is to symbolize, consumers are, and your guests are becoming increasingly accustomed to on-demand service, everything at their fingertips, almost, impossible to accomplish logistical feats of getting your groceries an hour later or anything you want within a day. And they carry those expectations forward into the hospitality experience. And that collectively, with plenty of the other challenges that we faced, it creates this macro dynamic that operations for hospitality operators in the short-term rental side and in the hotel side are just becoming more and more challenging. It's never been more important because guests' radar is up, but it's also never been more challenging because of many of these macro effects. And so what we'll focus on today is sort of talking about how we see those macro effects, some of the research that we've done, some surveying that we've done, some data points that we have from folks who are using Breezeway, and then some tips and sort of ideas around, what are the practical effects of this sort of these macro effects and convergence of hotel and short-term rental inventory. Because in the end, this picture almost looks like this is Michael Golden walking into his house from Noiseaware. But in the end, what we want is we want really good experiences, right? Like this is what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to achieve that people our guests walk into their room, they walk into their home, their accommodation, and they're really excited. And doing that, is increasingly challenging for a couple of the reasons that I just mentioned, right? Like, and there's more. Like one thing that I want to point out before it slips, because this just happened speaking with a hospitality operator they've got 300 units, individual units, yes, so they're in the short-term rental space, but they have the same challenges. And we were speaking last night at this conference in California about how they have had to, because of labor issues, like they have an occupancy level where they have to shut down and refuse to take any more guests, even though they have demand and they have supply. They don't have the labor to be able to turn over these properties, depending on the number of back-to-backs that they have, and depending on the labor that they have available in their market. They literally just cannot take any more guests. And so they will book out and block further reservations for those dates because they feel like they can't accommodate those guests. So I think it's a point I wanted to make before I forget, because it just came up last night. But what happens with these expectations is, there are so many new consumers coming into the market. We forget, if you roll back the clock just a little bit, right? And Michael did a nice job sort of laying out the landscape of, the vacation rental landscape. But, it's not that many years ago that Expedia purchased HomeAway, and that we started to see short-term rentals being commingled, on the large OTAs, or Booking getting involved to try and commingle vacation rentals with hotels. My prior company, FlipKey, we did that with TripAdvisor, but TripAdvisor always had a hard time sort of cross-shopping hotels and vacation rentals. And that was 6-7 years ago. But now those two sort of supplies are coming closer together. Again, Michael hit on this too, with the lines are blurring. There's a question from the audience about how do we define a short-term rental? Just how short is a short-term rental? Is it a week? Is it 30 days? Is it a flexible lease where you might stay for 4 months, but then you're moving on? As these lines blur, number one, on the distance, you're also seeing those lines blur from the hotel brands like Lifehouse and others, who are sort of rethinking the layout of a traditional hotel room, rethinking what their inventory looks like, rethinking how that flexible space can be pulled together. So in all of that, you're seeing new customers come to the market. And when they come to the market, and this is the first experience that they have with short-term rentals, and they're coming from the hotel side, they're coming with new expectations. They're coming with the expectation that when they walk into the property, everything is perfect. There's shampoo and sundries in the property. They're not going to need to bring anything. And that's a new shift. And clearly from our research, you can see, cleaning and safety remain, operators believe cleaning and safety will remain, one of the hottest topics and factors at booking. And that guests and owners proactively want timely communication. I don't think that's super surprising, but we'll dig a little more into that. We talked about this a little bit, and I think this is going to come up in the Q&A, so I won't steal Chris's thunder here. But contactless check-in certainly is the norm in short-term rentals and is increasing at a really high clip. That was happening pre-COVID. Operators were learning the efficiency of having contactless check-in with distributed inventory, right? You have homes or units that are, as many as you have operators who have 80 properties separated by 30 or 40 miles. Really challenging to make sure that everyone gets in, and just not a great guest experience to have them come to a central location or to open up multiple offices so that you can hand off keys. It's not what people want. When they show up, they want to get to their accommodation. And I assume, we'll probably talk about how that crossover into hotels is really important and part of the experience. And another thing that I think was going to happen, certainly in short-term rentals, is, regulatory scrutiny in these flexible. We're seeing a lot of this in the US. We're seeing a lot of this in Europe and internationally, where regulatory scrutiny on vacation rentals is increasing. And I think it will continue to increase. It's such a popular category. The spotlight is on it, whether it's Airbnb or Vacasa or some of the companies that Michael mentioned, that had received funding, who, like Noiseware, who's our partner, Guesty, who's our PMS partner, Journey, who's a client, uses Breezeway in the back end for technology. There's a big spotlight on vacation rentals. And I think that's going to attract regulators as well. And so how are operators handling this? So they're working to really strengthen and deliver the brand experience. I've got a few slides to cover here, so I won't read through all of this. I'm just going to highlight some of the high points. But improving the quality of the properties is a big factor. And adopting technology and actually leveraging property data. Property data is one thing that we think is really interesting from Breezeway's perspective. I started this company because I think how these properties are maintained, how they're cleaned, how they're prepared for the next guest is critically important to differentiating your brand and creating an environment for repeat guests, making sure you get great ROI from your marketing efforts if you're using channel distribution, et cetera. Like, it's a key piece of the puzzle. And I think there's an underserved market for all of the information that folks actually know about the property. And for people in the hotel side, hoteliers will use this maybe in a system or accustomed to this from operations, thinking about credits and the number of credits that a room takes to turn over, right? Now, this is a suite. It's going to be 1.5 credits, probably take X number of time for somebody to clean. And I'm going to set up their time because there's not that much unique features from room to room in a typical standard hotel. But when you break that apart and you start to think that, like, okay, hotel inventory is going to start to look a little different. It's going to be more unique. It's going to be a little more authentic. Each room's going to have different elements to some extent. Now, all of a sudden, you have a much broader range of property data and unit data to help drive your operational choices, or trying to change cleaning time based on length of stay or the number of guests or the type of guests. Was this a family in the room versus business travel for 2 days? Totally different operational burden And it's a really underserved piece of the market, which, given all the dynamics that we talked about, is really important for operators to keep in mind. One more here, and then we'll move on. This is from an internal survey that we did of hospitality operators in the market about what they were planning to invest in from technology. And I think the one standout piece, two standout pieces here, 70% customizing housekeeping based on each property or on the unit type. We're seeing a lot more activity in that space because folks can really dial in what's supposed to happen at each unit. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But more importantly, and Federico talked about this with like a WhatsApp channel and like really bringing that communication forward with the guest. Strengthening guest communication and client services, was such an important piece of what people are thinking about for the experience at the property. And technology in the space, SMS interactions with your guests have now become the norm that everyone really expects. And it's such a perfect scenario and perfect medium for communicating with your guests that we've seen just massive adoption of that sort of technology. Some of that first started with hotels and Zingle years ago, but everyone is adopting that technology because it's so nice. And property safety, this is probably a topic that's dear to Chris's heart. Property safety and preventative maintenance. This is something that we spend a lot of time focusing on at Breezeway in our partnership with Justin Ford on the safety side, because we believe this addresses an issue in the market around how these properties are actually prepared and prepared well, and that there's not enough information for guests to really understand, and there's not enough information for managers to show and operators to showcase the effort and the work that they do. If you think about it, as Michael was saying, right, like it's not just that in the hotel side you have something like Opera, which is just a massive beast on the hotel technology side, versus a fragmented vacation rental software landscape. That dynamic carries down into the operators, right? Where there are very few, we talked about Vacasa being, a leading brand in the vacation rental side, but there are very few large vacation rental brands. There are lots and lots of small ones, lots of independent operators, and the line blurs from very small professional from a large market established property manager, maybe with 1,000 units, down to one who has 50, down to an individual owner who decides that they want to self-manage. And they all need to be following the same standards of operation and they need to bring that forward so people can understand the time that they spend working on these properties. So why is this so important, right? People are cross-shopping hotels, there's younger travelers, and it's table stakes. We've talked about this, but 11% of travelers are more likely to book a short-term rental than they were before. There's a lot more interest coming towards this market. Couple of quick slides here. What do travelers value at booking? You can see shifting priorities. This is not a surprise, right? But much more sensitivity to COVID, cleaning and safety becoming a consideration. This was on a traveler survey that we did, which is incredible, right? Cleaning and safety outpacing location and price and amenities at the property. So how are people thinking about this? Like the experience first approach from booking all the way to checkout, and then how you layer in communication has been a real pain point for hospitality operators because they're trying to deliver this deeper hospitality feel. They're trying to take the work they do, the property preparation, the communication, and sync it together so that they can actually accomplish this in an effective, efficient way. And that's where technology is playing an increasing role. We like to talk, and we mean it when we do, to hospitality providers that, there's a reason so many of these folks are tech forward, because it's a very challenging job. Again, you go back to Michael's slide of that like very broad technological landscape. Because the bottom line is that, the impact of operations on the profitability of your business is enormous. Federico talked about this, right? Like bookings are back, but now you also have to look at the expense side and how much work are we doing? And if you move into flexible inventory that looks a little more like short-term rental, your pain points from an operational perspective get much worse and they're much more tangled at the same time that you have to meet these heightened standards. And it's, I think we can all agree, and I think we heard some of this from Federico, it's a massive challenge. So I want to make sure we're saving time for Q&A here. So I'll go through, I think I have 3 or 4 more slides, but we'll finish on time. Really what we end up seeing people can do from a technology side to sort of manage this convergence and think about all these challenges is like, how do you optimize the operation, right? The workload is shifting. It's becoming harder. You've got more to do, and you might have even less people and time to do it with flexible booking windows. So you really have to optimize your task scheduling. And here's a couple of tips that we've seen helping thousands of managers, do the same thing, which is really focus on like staff availability, location, and automating scheduling. This is something hotels have done for a long time, adopted service optimization software, either through Opera or to sit next to it. But it's more challenging if you have a mixed inventory of mixed portfolio, short-term rental, some hospitality. And I think just like we were hearing from Federico, like it's more challenging now when the booking windows and the cancellation windows shift. And, there's concerns and there's availability or restrictions on labor and how you can get it and how you're going to match that together. Again, speaking with a provider last night, right? They struggle even to have default cleaners work on the same units time after time or the same homes because they're just not sure what they're going to get or what the configuration, the ratio of back-to-backs to non are. And if you have an extended stay or you have a very late booking window, all of a sudden you could be shifting 10% of your work just within the last week, or maybe 3 or 4 days before a very busy weekend and turnover day. And that makes a huge change. So customizing what you actually need to do for each property makes a big difference. Another thing here is thinking about triggered workflows, whether you're doing it through WhatsApp and through other technology. There's just technology is starting to bring these pieces together. And a great example of this is, our work with NoiseAware, where if a noise alert is received, we can send a message directly to the guest, or our work with many of the smart lock providers, where we can get checkout signal from the lock to understand that somebody has checked out and then kick off a cleaning workflow so that if you have 20% of guests who have left early, you can actually get a jump on those units and those properties, cleaning them early, offering you the ability to extend early check-in or late checkout to some other guests and really turn that into a revenue driver. Checklists are really big. It's been a really big item in the short-term rental space. We know that it's been a big item in the hotel space for a while, from quality assurance checklists, et cetera. But as the inventory becomes unique and more authentic, customizing for housekeeping and inspections at each location down to specific assets is just becoming, even more critical. When consumer expectations are up, you can't afford to let something. You can't afford to be spending so much time. Hospitality management is a labor-intensive job, which means there's margin compression. There's only so much margin that you have, only so much expense you can take on to deliver this experience. So it's got to be tight. and you don't have a lot of room for error, right? Like we don't want to be offering refunds to guests because something was wrong in the room, or you know, anything that's just a little out of place. And so the only way you can do that and really dial that in is to make sure that you're getting quality information back from the field to understand exactly what is supposed to happen. And those of you from the hotel side, very common, right? Like large brand hotels have massive 600-page brand standard guidelines of exactly where everything is supposed to be in the room. Hard to do across short-term rental inventory, and yet consumers demand the exact same experience. And I think we're almost to the end. But staff communication is really important too. A massive WhatsApp channel gets the job done because at least everyone is communicating and they're all in the same spot. But it's really challenging later on to try and figure out, you know, was Jeremy talking about running late to this unit or to this property? Was that a broken screen door here that he was mentioning? And did we actually take care of that? Or how did we close the loop on this? Which cleaning is going to take longer than I thought another one was? And so the more you can tie those together and tie the communication to specific tasks, the better off you are. And we've seen that really change the operations for many clients and who are trying to take a more tech forward approach using purpose-built tools to accomplish the goals. And staff communication is really key, especially when you know it's getting harder and harder to hire folks. And I think that's going to be a dynamic that just increases. That's not going away, which will put more pressure on operators. You really want to make sure that people understand what's expected of them for their job, and they've got an easy way to communicate back, number one, that they've done it correctly, or if they're not going to be able to get it done correctly, that they can communicate with their supervisor, with the team, to make sure that it does get done well, because they're really your brand ambassadors. And I think this is the last slide. And then powering guest communication. So guest messaging, talked about this a little bit earlier, but automated guest messaging, we have seen this really change the workflow and dynamic for several providers, because what it does is it provides you a way, we talk about this a lot, and we won't have time to talk about it today, but we talk a lot about how, and I mentioned it, the workload for you is going to continue to increase, and yet people want this personalized experience. So the only thing you can do to be successful is figure out what you can automate through technology so that you can spend human time really on points that people can feel. And what's really nice about automated and SMS guest communication is you can personalize that. You can start from an automated spot, and then you can engage personally thereafter and really change the dynamic of, I feel like the, you know, I'm staying in a hotel right now, and I'm shocked and a little disappointed that I haven't received a text from the hotel just to see if everything is okay. If they did, would be great. And I would tell them, yes, it is. And then later when they asked me for a review via text, I would be 10 times more likely to actually fill it out and provide a 5-star review. Because they didn't, I'm very unlikely to actually provide a review of this hotel, even though I really like it. And that's about it from us. I don't want to take too much time on about us, but this is what we focus on, which is elevating experiences at the property. And, you know, thanks to Bitterroom and to Chris and everyone here. I love the panel, and I thought, you know, Federico deserves a round of applause. This is the first time he's been presenting this sort of information, and he really dug in to share it with us. So thank you.